Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us Mr. PPR Thiagarajan. Uh, he is currently a sitting MLA representing Madurai constituency in the Tamil Nadu Assembly, and he is also member of the Tamil Nadu uh, Public Accounts Committee. Mr. Thiagarajan had an illustrious career based in US and in Singapore. He had been an investment banker, a trader, and he wears multiple hats. He writes extensively, and today in Tamil Nadu, he is one of the finest brains, and I would call him as a public policy wonk. Mr. Thiagarajan, thank you for joining our meeting. And what I propose to do is to discuss about the epidemic that we are facing in the country and in the world. And also, I would like to get your ideas about how do we move forward, both at the state level and also at the national level. To start with, let's do a philosophical approach. You had in your article dated April 3rd, 2020, in the News Minute, had discussed about the coronavirus as not only a health crisis, but also an economic and humanitarian crisis. I would also add that we also have challenges of a moral crisis in terms of, what is the duty of the citizen? What should the fact of a patriotism do? We have the need to question the government or we just follow it. And I also want you to touch upon your own personal journey to buttress this point that, what is your take on the sense of patriotism and how can individual citizens contribute to the betterment of mankind? Go ahead, sir.
First of all, thank you for the invitation and thank you very much for the kind introduction. Actually, I've spoken quite a lot and written quite a lot as well on various aspects, but I think you're the first person who's asked me more the philosophical aspect. So let me kind of focus on that first. I speak multiple times a year at many places, at convocations with students, so forth. And I think a year or two ago, I spoke at the Independence Day function at a college in Madurai. And I said that it is a citizen's greatest duty to hold the government accountable, to ask questions. I am not one of those who believe that patriotism comes from kind of herd mentality of following like sheep. I believe the citizen's greatest duty is care for other citizens. And the way you care for other citizens is that you ask your government and you ask the systems and the institutions why they are not doing more to take care of them and you, or why your rights are not being enforced and theirs. So I would say overall, though it's alarming from my perspective when I look around the world at how many countries we are seeing the rise of fundamentalism and so forth. In fact, I would go so far as to say in many countries, kind of authoritarian or right-wing leaders are trying to base it as a personality cult and say that, being against or for a leader or that leader's policies is somehow the litmus test for patriotism or citizenship. And I think that's completely wrong. So, in a nutshell, I believe that asking questions, caring for others is the greatest obligation of a citizen. And I think in a crisis like this, it is even more so relevant, right? So, if I look at it as compared to normal times, should you be more willing to question during crisis or not? I actually believe a crisis provides both kind of structural as well as economic or health or, as you say, moral risks, because all too often we have seen dictatorships form through crises or the stripping of rights through crises. You've seen what has happened in Hungary in Europe. You're seeing where in the US the discussion has been of the president trying to exert his authority and say that he is absolute, and governors pushing back and saying, no, that's not true. We are a democracy. We have elected presidents, not kings. So let me conclude that point with just one thing. Different people enter politics for different reasons. I think most people enter with some sense of the greater good or the common good. I actually see this as kind of almost fate, in the sense that I went away to the US as a graduate student in 1987. In 1995, I got a green card straight out of my student visa under the national interest waiver. And then, various reasons later, I tried to come back to India. When my father passed away unexpectedly in 2006, then Chief Minister and party leader Talaivar Kalaignar offered me a chance to come back and take his place. Unfortunately, I couldn't do it for personal reasons. My wife, American, was pregnant. My young son was 1 year old. She was pregnant with her second son. So for various reasons, I couldn't come. But then I, went to Singapore and I got permanent residence there. And we still have a house in New York. So a guy like me who has other options in life, who has had careers and professions and assets in other parts of the world, could have easily chosen to do other things. And I came here because I wanted to be a good citizen and follow in my family's footsteps and add value. And in that sense, I believe that people like me who have the professional background, who are ex-bankers or consultants, advisors, have a special duty to speak up and to bring the full weight of our experience and our kind of insight to bear. And I don't see that as being a negative to a government. I see that as being constructive and adding value. We all live in the same country, the same state, the same city, the same planet. Either we all get through this together or we don't. So it's almost like I feel an added burden beyond the average kind of citizen, or even beyond the average politician, MLA in Tamil Nadu, to do that.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. It's been very impressive to hear about your own personal journey. I would now like to jump to your letter dated 31st of March to the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu. You had, in fact, written a very elaborate letter running to 13 pages, covering in all 10 issues. The two issues that I would like you to elaborate on, particularly from the point of view that you do not seem to be impressed with the way this government has handled this COVID issue, since they could have done many things better. The two issues that you highlight, one is on the Disaster Management Committee, or rather the non-functioning of the committee. The other is the continued assembly session, where we should have concentrated on the pandemic in terms of strategizing and putting in place proper mechanisms. Would you like to elaborate on these two issues, as they are critical for us to move forward in this conversation?
Yeah, listen, I think there's always a risk at a time like this. People accuse each other, both the ruling party to the opposition and the opposition to the ruling party, of playing politics. At the end of the day, I don't understand. What is politics? If it's not service of the people and betterment of policy, I'm not sure what politics is, at least for people like us. This is not office politics or power politics. This is public service politics. So in that sense, I would say the reason I brought up these concerns to the government is that I feel we are repeating the same mistakes again and again as a government, as a party, the ADMK party, and as a Tamil Nadu government, which is all our government, whether they form it or not. It's the government for all the people. So specifically, I said three things. I said, number one, when the 2015 floods happened in Chennai, the CAG's report showed pretty clearly that there had been very poor administration. In fact, the State Disaster Management Committee had not met even once. Till then, not even once since formation, since mandatory formation. So, I said for 2015, you had that problem. Again, in the Gaja hurricane, you had a problem. In my personal experience, in my constituency, 2018, February, there was a fire in the Meenakshi Amman temple. I made extensive analysis, comments, requests, and the state government said they were going to issue a report. And I said, please look for lessons to be learned and to implement for future, and also ramp up the budget. So at least till the 1920 fiscal year that ended when the lockdown was announced, The government had not acted on any of those. It had not really stepped up much. In fact, the 2015 flood report had been suppressed for 2 years. It was made ready in 17. It was not released till 19. So I think my first concern is, if you, for the sake of trying to project an artificial competence to the people when you don't have it, if you try to suppress reports or not admit your mistakes, you are digging yourself a deeper hole. It's only when we admit, well, nobody is perfect. No government is extraordinarily foresightful. Everybody has limitations. Those who admit that they perhaps were less than ideal at some point, learn and move on, and grow from that, are the ones that will serve the people well. So my first concern was, there was no history of recognition of limitation or attempt to improve. My second concern was, when this crisis came upon us, the first case reported in Kerala, January 30th, international traveler. We know that Tamil Nadu is one of the single biggest destinations, if not the number one state, of international arrivals. Arrivals both in terms of tourism as well as expatriates and the non-Indian expatriates coming here, Indian expatriates returning home because it's a big state. Kerala may have a higher per capita, but we are a big state in size and population, more than 2 times or 2.5 times Kerala's population. So in that sense, we should have known that there was going to be equal or worse problem for us, and we should have started to act on it. So either we should have done pre-planning disaster management well, fail, no problem. Follow Kerala, fail, no problem. There was a third fail-safe, which is that our party leader, K Stalin, and the deputy leader, Thiaga, leader and deputy leader of the opposition in the assembly by title, had been raising this issue every time we met. In fact, the DMK medical wing had the state conference in February and had brought up this as an issue, as one of the resolutions, that the state should start making preparations for this. So multiple times in the assembly, we said, get the state ready, stop this session. What was the session for? It was a session to pass the demands for grants for the upcoming 2021 year. Now, the problem with that is, in the last 4 years this government has been in office, it has not even brought a demand for grant till May 29th at the earliest, and they usually get passed sometime like July, August, September, after having run a vote on account in February and March. So when that is your track record, that even in the past 4 years you have never felt the urgency to pass the demand for grants and you've been able to go on a vote on account, why did you feel suddenly the need to run this session with this urgency? And I say that not again as a vindictive point, it is an operational point. One of the most intensive periods of any government is the running of the budget and the demand for grants at the assembly. Every single IAS officer, every single senior civil servant, every MLA, every minister is in the house every day for hours on end going through all of these proceedings. Where is there time to worry about disaster management or planning or adequacy or ordering personal protective equipment or masks or gloves or test kits or lockdowns or whatever? So I think this complete draw of attention, and I brought up even a more minor point. If we worry, and the government of Tamil Nadu did one thing slightly earlier than the lockdown. On the 15th, 16th, 17th of March, they started getting information, so they shut the schools and the theaters and the malls and all that. Now, my point is, if you believe that congregating lots of people in one place is a risk, therefore you shut down education, which is the most important building block of a society, why are you still running the assembly for an unnecessary demand for grants? Because 234 MLAs who always go home to their constituencies on the weekend, come back to Chennai for the week, their aides, the assembly staff, the extra police, you are putting like 2,000-3,000 people into close confinement into a jam-packed place. If there is risk of communal spread, you have just created the worst hotspot because you're dragging people from all corners of the state into one place. So it was very kind of backward-looking policy that enabled this kind of continuity. So neither did you have the history of planning or learning from your previous disaster management audit findings and recommendations, nor did you look at Kerala and take an example, nor did you take the word of our opposition leader, and you ignored all these for what? To do something that is futile. Just think about it. Most of the world is going to pass supplemental budgets. The economic disaster is so bad that most of the world is giving stimuluses that are so big that they equal to another 100% of the pre-planned budget, or 50% or 80%, which means that the budget that we passed in March and the demand for grants that were accelerated and rushed through and all this nonsense are irrelevant. The odds of attaining those targets after what we now know to be a 5 or 6 week lockdown, and we should have anticipated was going to be bad, are exactly zero. Neither will the government be able to meet its revenue target, nor will it be able to therefore spend the way it wanted to spend. So it was a complete exercise in futility. And even to the last, the chief minister was so stubborn that when we said shut it down, he said, no, rather than shut it down, we will accelerate all the demands and bring them forward. First to 4 or 5 days, then finally just to 1 day. Now my question is, what a farce of democracy to put 24 or 25 departments' demands on 1 day, and the exercise in futility because you cannot implement any of those demands, you're never going to make that money. And therefore, to delay the shutdown of the state. So the assembly session finishes at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the evening on Tuesday, and then you say that 6 o'clock the state goes into lockdown. And how do you implement the lockdown? You don't even make arrangements for the same number of buses or special transport arrangements that you do for a Pongal or a Diwali. You announce on Monday morning that you're going to lock down Tuesday evening. Surely they could have made 2 phone calls or 3 phone calls to the managing directors of all the state transport corporations and the railways support they get, and said, sir, we're going to lock down in 36 hours or 40 hours. Please try and get us as much support as possible so we can get people home. But they didn't do that. So you saw what happened on the night of the lockdown. We had tens of thousands, if not lakhs of people stuck in the large transportation hubs. So in every way, and again, I'm not saying this because I'm saying they fail. Of course they fail. The point is, what can we learn from this going forward to make sure we don't fail again? That's the only reason I say all these things.
Okay. Sir, I would like to shift to another issue which has been troubling us in a way of speaking. You have, in fact, covered this extensively in your article in the News Minute dated April 3rd, 2020, wherein you had spoken about reliable data and its availability to us. You have also mentioned that in this we are not doing enough testing and that it is important to obtain data relating to hospitalization rate both at the district level and village level, and also obtain data relating to the death rate to decide on the next course of action. I find this as a very important input in handling this pandemic. Would you like to elaborate further on the reliability and credibility of the data that we have at this point of time? Over to you, sir.
Listen, let me go even one step back. One of the things, one of the reasons we asked for, but that is my leader kept asking for an all-party committee or a team, or at least a meeting to help the government do this. As I say, we live in the same state. This is not a segregation disease that affects people by party or caste or religion or economic status. Either it's an epidemic that gets all of us, or we are able to contain it for all of us. So, since our lives and our livelihoods and the people of Tamil Nadu are at stake, we said let's at least all get together and come up with a kind of incremental heads on the table. Now, why is that important? If those of us like you and me who have operated in corporate environments, diversity is always one of the highest priorities, right? Because we know that however smart you are, the range of experiences of the people at the table, the diversity in background increases the likelihood of a variety of ideas coming, and we can pick the best of those ideas. Instead of looking at only 6, we look at 20 and we pick the best ones, and those are likely to be more successful or more likely to be successful. So in that sense, we said, let's get a few more heads in here. And then in precise terms, there were 2 reasons. The first is, you remember in 2009, there was a pandemic. There was the H1N1 flu pandemic. And in that period, Tamil Nadu was under a DMK government and Delhi was in a UPA government. And in retrospect, the management of that pandemic was much better than it is now. It was timely, it was a bit thoughtful. Of course, it wasn't as great a risk, I agree. But surely it is in the interest of people who have never managed a pandemic before to take inputs from a party and members who had been in office that time and say, can you help us based on your experience? So they were not willing to take that. They went one step further. Chief Minister put out a tweet saying, The reason I don't want to call an all-party conference is because this is purely a medical problem and doesn't require any political input. That is the most immature statement I can think of. How is it that this is only a political problem? We are talking about the economic consequences, the humanitarian consequences, the moral consequences, the consequences to the structure of our democracy. How is this only a medical problem? Number one. Number two, if it is a medical problem, it's the worst medical problem they faced till now. Surely they want to take the input of people who have faced a previous pandemic into it. In particular, I, as an individual, just made two suggestions. I said, if we do not model well, we cannot make decisions well because we are stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea. If we lock down in any aggressive way, we are throwing millions into deprivation and potential hunger and starvation. If we do not lock down, we worry that millions may get infected and have health problems. But we can't tell because we don't model this, unless we model the spread and unless we look at risk return, like we do in any business, like you or I did in our corporate careers, we can't really tell what is the trade off.
So modeling is key.
Well, if you want modeling, you have to have two things. One is data, and two is sophisticated modeling technology. So I had suggested in my article back then that since the testing is so low, even as of today, Tamil Nadu has tested about 1 in 15,000 people in the population.
We are testing only those with symptoms, right? Under these circumstances, why don't we look at data, though testing ahead of time for infection is a leading indicator? That is, it tells you who's likely to get sick.
If you did random testing in the market, in fact, we're not doing random testing on the street. We're only testing those with symptoms who come to the hospital. But if we did random testing of all people in the population, then it is a leading indicator. It's allowing you to extrapolate the spread and therefore make decisions based on what you expect to happen in the future. But since that data is not available and there's no way we can get there, there's a global excess of demand to supply of test kits that's like factor of 5 or 10 to 1. Our purchasing power is not that great. If we personally had been government, my leader would have said, let us encourage some manufacturers in Tamil Nadu. Let us find some, because we are a huge manufacturing state. We have great innovation. We have huge engineers. We have biomedical companies. Why don't we try and manufacture? But leave that aside. Even if we were to find a manufacturer, it would still take us weeks, if not months, to get the number of test kits needed. So I said, if we can't get a leading indicator, let's at least get a lagging or a deeply lagging indicator. That is, how many people are in hospital for serious illnesses and how many people are dying, and compare those rates to last year's rates or 2 years ago's rates or 3 years ago's rates. And then we'll know what the extent of the problem is. Now, people are doing this in the UK, in Italy, in Spain, and they're finding that the actual number of dead is actually gone up, spiked up a lot more than the designated COVID-related deaths. So something is going on that we can't really understand. Even in a place like UK and Spain, they're able to see these lagging indicators give more evidence than real-time testing or leading indicators. Surely in a place like Tamil Nadu or India, we should do that. And if we have that data, we still need modeling on top of that. So I had suggested back on March 28th or 31st, are we doing enough modeling? Do we have specialists, like epidemiological modeling specialists? I was pleasantly surprised in some ways and disappointed in other ways that only for the first time the word of getting specialists was mentioned by the health secretary on her April 4th press conference. That's the first time she said that we are going to get some people from some institute and we're going to start modeling. So we were late in getting data, we were late in starting modeling, and even now I'm not sure that we are recording what I requested 3 weeks ago, which is hospitalization and death rates. Even death rates you take, for example, under normal circumstances, whatever the death rates were, in India, at least 10 or 15% of those were related to accidental death in factories, in road accidents, through homicide, or through violent crime. All those would have come down when you're in lockdown.
So you need to actually categorize death by cause and look for those unexplained or easily misclassifiable.
Classify as heart attack, but actually it's because of this. Classify as pneumonia, but actually is not. It's twice the rate of pneumonia deaths of last year. So we need more data and we need to model better. I think we are starting to get the modeling skill. I'm not sure we're able to get the data yet. The government has shown no inclination, no steps to do that.
Okay, the next part of this conversation, I would like you to briefly touch upon the issue in terms of those medical protective equipments that you had discussed in the letter. We also know about the lack of testing kits in the state, the lack of adequate testing in the state, And you might also recall that there was a recent article in the News Minute where they had discussed about various numbers being bandied about when it comes to the testing kits. I would like you to briefly touch upon these two issues before we go to the next steps and the lessons learned, sir.
Yeah, listen, it's not complicated, and I don't want to be seen as just finding fault. It's very clear that because we waited too late to act, because they didn't take inputs from us, because the health minister, and we have video clips of him saying as late as March 18th or 20th that it will not be required for everybody, only certain people would need masks and so forth. So the lack of time. See, whenever you try to implement a policy very late and therefore very quickly, your lack of planning forces you to act in haste because suddenly it has dawned on you that you've been behind. When that happens, you're always going to find yourself short, and the odds of you achieving your targets go down and the odds of unintended consequences go up. So PPE is simply that. I don't want to get into that anymore. The testing kits, though, tell a different story because like it was slightly in PPE, in testing kits, the week, I think it was, not the News Minute, put out an article just compiling the statements of the health minister, the health secretary, and the chief minister over a period of, I don't know, several days. And so one day they say 3 lakh kits, one day they say 50,000 kits, one day they say 20,000 kits, one day the chief minister says 3 lakh kits and 50,000 arriving tonight. Then 4 or 5 days later, the Chennai Corporation Commissioner informs us that the Chennai Corporation had ordered 50,000 kits, but had not gotten any because not even one kit is arrived into the country of India of the rapid kits that they ordered. So I think, this notion of transparency is somewhat lacking here. So performance is performance. Now you have two schools of thought on this. One is you try to obfuscate the performance. You try to suppress the lack of performance.
And you say that things are going great. The argument for that is that you try to make people feel calm and safe.
The anti-argument is to say, don't make up stories as you go along. People deserve to know the truth and to act based on what the real situation is so that they can make their own decisions based on what the reality is. The other is that it is so incoherent. They are so discombobulated. They are not connected with each other. So in their minds, they think they're telling the truth, but each guy gets a different fact and a different truth, truth as far as they know truth. So if that is the case, then the real question arises, goes back to the original point. If you had proper disaster management committees and plans and systems, then this gap would not have existed. But with your permission, I want to segue from that to a slightly different perspective, which is, irrespective of PPE or irrespective of test communications, in general, the overall communications, both at the Delhi level and at the state level, have been lacking, in my opinion. Right? I mean, at the Delhi level, let's not even get into it. The kind of profound, dissonance of things like people gathering to bang plates and set off fireworks. I'll go so far as to call it stupidity. Is not in the realm of normal people's discussion. So, that was completely wasted opportunities at communication and what can I say? Debilitatingly, societally bad outcomes were felt because of miscommunication. But let's take Tamil Nadu. In the case of Tamil Nadu, I think the government is not only failing at communication on the modeling and the data and the rates and the testing and all that, it is failing at communication on operationalizing this lockdown. The rules have been changing every day, precisely because they shut it down, with no advance notice. What is allowed, not allowed, what is the range of distance you can go, which area is the new potential person and therefore there's a lockdown of that area. These are things that are changing all the time. Now, you and I have been in large corporate global level organizations before. Communication, even within a professional corporate organization, is difficult. You want people to get the message. You can't just say it once. You can't just put out one email. You can't just put out one web link. You have to say it repeatedly, and you have to be very clear. What is the situation that we're in? What are the risks? What are the dangers? What should you not be afraid of? For example, I put out a voice blast about 10 or 12 minutes long to my constituents. And I said, yes, it's it's an infectious disease. But over 95% of those who get it will not have severe symptoms, and like a very small percentage will end up dying. So please don't treat it as something to panic about and start, fighting with each other and kind of discriminating against people on the perception that they may have it or not. And so I put my credibility on the line to get the message across that this is a more dangerous version of an infectious disease, but it's not like everybody who touches it dies, or even 10% of who get the infection die. So you calm the people, you give clarity of information, reduce the risk of panic and of discriminatory and negative behavior, increase the likelihood of good behavior, safety precautions, etc., and explain to the people what is the situation on the ground, what is allowed, not allowed. In fact, in my note, I went one step further. I said, if the government really wants to communicate properly, it must standardize and synchronize its schedule. Every day, it must send out the same update of conditions to internal officers, like 3 p.m. every day, or 5 p.m. every day, or 9 a.m. every day, from the CM's office or from the head office. It should go to every district collector, every IPS, PSP or city commissioner, every corporation commissioner. It should go to all these people and then district union chairman, and all of them should be forced to make like 2 or 3 minute videos, selfie videos, or get somebody, their friend, to take a video. Says, these are the rules. This is allowed. This is not allowed. This is the change from yesterday. This was not allowed yesterday. Is now allowed today. This was allowed yesterday. Is now banned today. And send it out. Everybody in Tamil Nadu is on WhatsApp, right? We have the highest internet penetration in any state in India. Something like 70-75% of our population has IP, internet smartphones. So we are in a place where the government should have been, it's an unprecedented lockdown. We have never seen anything like this before. The government should have been over communicating, because there's no such thing as too much communication in a place, at a time like this, in a place like ours.
They should have been saying, here is the situation on the ground.
Here's the risk you face. Here's what you do not face. Please do not do these things. Only do these things. These are the rules. These are the changes every day in a video that people... Now, I'll give you the reason why video. Let's say I'm an average citizen going out to the shop. Government has now told us that in certain areas, fishing is allowed. If fishing is allowed, surely buying fish is allowed, right? So I'm going to the fish shop to buy fish, and the policemen, who may not be as well informed, they're also working long hours, they're also overstressed. There are a few lakh policemen, maybe 2 lakh policemen or 3 lakh policemen policing a state of 7.5 crore. So they also may not get the message. They're working overtime. They're not sleeping enough, So if somebody stops me and says, you're not allowed to go, I pull out my phone and show my city commissioner's video saying today fish buying is allowed. After that, I have no problem. I go, right? So the credibility of the messenger adds to the clarity of the message if they do it right. So I worry that even now, this government is not really doing enough on the communication front and leaving people to operate in kind of half information, and a gap between the enforcers like the police or the city employees and the enforced like the average citizen.
I would just now go on to your article in the Quint on April 10th. This is following your discussion with India Today, wherein you had actually in the article you had referred to the interview with India Today TV. Now, you had proposed a three-pronged strategy in terms of handling the future. One is about the center offering suitable guidelines to the state, which can then be adopted by everyone. In fact, we can recall that it was just on April 14th. That's alongside the address to the nation by the Prime Minister, there was a detailed government order that was issued. The second point that you had spoken about is the standardization of the fiscal stimulus in terms of risk perspective at the micro level, at the district level or at the state level. And the third point is about the communication strategy, which you had spoken about. Would you like to talk about the first two parts so that we would be able to cover all the three aspects? But just one second. I would also like you to touch upon the impact on GDP, which you had discussed in one of the articles that you had written. It could have an impact of 2% in an already declining GDP growth scenario. Um, I would just like you to briefly explain these issues.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I think there were multiple questions there. So let me try and go, one at a time. I would say the primary concern for me in writing those articles was to say that there is no such thing, just like there was no such thing as shutting down an economy on 4 hours notice like that. Right? Just like you cannot take something from 100 to 0 just like that. You cannot take something back from 0 to 100 just like that. The whole point of the shutdown will get negated. I gave an analogy at some other video conference where I said I used to sail boats at one point. Right? The longer the boat, the inertia goes up substantially more. It's not just a linear function. It's like an exponential function. So 40-foot boat, let's say you want to decide to stop, you got to do it, I don't know, 30 seconds and like 500 meters ahead. 50-foot board, you now got to take 45 seconds or 60 seconds and, 800, 900 meters ahead, even though it's only 20% increase in the length. Because systems they have inertia, they keep going. You got to cut it down slowly. So in that sense, I said, once we are now in an alleged so-called total lockdown, there is no such thing as open the economy tomorrow. You have to do it location by location, risk by risk, step by step. In that sense, I said, you can match the risk and the lockdown. If you had good data or good modeling, or if you started looking at hospitalization and death data, like I said, you would have at least a lagging indicator or a current contemporary indicator of where the risk is what. And based on that, you could decide what level of lockdown. Most people would say, have standardized levels of lockdown.
Lockdown level 0 means nothing, everything is normal. 1 means shut down all large gatherings, malls, theaters, school, assemblies, but everything else goes on.
Lockdown level 2 means section 144 is in place. So on. You could go all the way to, as you presumably, what we're now is lockdown level 5. Everything is hypothetically shut. But if you're going to go step by step, then you can standardize across the country, because some things are within our control as a state. You won't find a more ardent federalist than me. I believe the states are the only place where the action happens. In fact, it may be the panchayats and the corporations, not even the states.
But if you have a full travel lockdown, for example, and we have such a large population of migrant workers, surely that has to be coordinated in an interstate way. I cannot say.
Travel is allowed in Tamil Nadu in buses till the Tamil Nadu border. Karnataka says they won't allow anybody in, and it stops. So there are things that have to be coordinated, or guidelines that have to be done at a national level, as there always are. Even the most ardent federalist says foreign policy, defense, international trade, interstate commerce, all this should be regulated and kind of collectively bargained for in the center. So this is another case where there's a clear role for the center in how these things should be gradually opened. Just like it shouldn't have been totally shut from 100%, it should not be totally open to 100%. But my greater concern, at least as far as Tamil Nadu is concerned, is that still the state government is worried about publicity, image, and politics. And I worry that they don't understand the depth of this problem, right? How can a chief minister, 10 days into the worst crisis economically that we will have faced? I didn't say 2%, I said it'll be twice as bad as GDP. Twice as bad as demonetization. Demonetization was probably 2% of GDP. Will be at least twice as bad as that. So in fact, I will go one step further. I will predict
stand corrected.
This year we will definitely have a mathematical recession. That means growth will be negative compared to last year, which is something we have never seen. Now, I said this 3 weeks ago. At that time, maybe I was out on a limb and I was ahead of the IMF and other people saying it. But today, I'm the mainstream, because not only has the IMF cut back its forecast dramatically, about 4 or 5 days ago, but about 36 hours ago, China's GDP data came out, and the first quarter, China shrank by more than 6.75% on a quarter-over-quarter basis. which is unheard of in China. In the last, you can see, China was the global leader of growth. And after slowing last year, they were +6, +5.5, +6.5. In one quarter, they've gone to -6.75 or 6.85, I forget exactly. So think about what I'm saying. I'm saying that we are going to have a mathematical recession this year, meaning that GDP output of the year 2021 will be lower than the GDP output of 1920. Just only adjusted for inflation, but taking nothing else out, which means it is the worst recession we will have seen in our lifetime, certainly yours and mine. Now, if that is the case, surely by now the government should have started to shift its attention beyond just containment, which it continues to have to do, but it should have been doing more testing or, secondary data, like I say, of death, hospitalization, whatever. But by now it should be deep into how am I going to mitigate the consequences of this, because I went into full lockdown and I can only do partial recovery. So the definition of, a V-shaped recovery in economics is it goes down, it comes back. You cannot expect it to come back because you cannot allow it to come back. You can only allow activity to come back stage by stage. So whether you like it or not, you're looking at a long recovery curve. That means, those at the bottom of the pyramid are going to have a much worse time. Think about demonetization. It was primarily a liquidity crunch. Everybody else wanted to continue their activity. Suppliers wanted to keep making. Demand for consumers was still there. In fact, because it was only a liquidity crunch and because therefore it turned out to be a demand problem first before it was a longer term structural supply problem, you didn't see any inflation at all. You would have thought with money going down and availability of goods situation, you should have thought that you'll have a scarcity problem. But in fact, the demand dropped so dramatically that in fact the prices started dropping rather than increasing.
So normally in a liquidity glut, you take the risk of inflation. But here there was no problem because liquidity is short. Here what we are seeing, what shall I say, a multi-step economic problem.
There was a supply problem first, right? Including things like batteries in the Indian market, we import from China. When China started locking down, supply problem came first. So the price of things and the availability of things shifted up in the kind of supply curve. But now that people have been put away without work for an extended period of time, now we have a demand problem. A lot of people who don't make enough money to even buy food, surely they're not buying clothes or other things, or phones or whatever. Because of that, what will happen? A lot of the weaker enterprises will fail because they will not be able to sustain their business if they don't have revenue and they don't have sales. So then you'll have a second supply shock. When those businesses fail, they will lay off the employees that work for them. Then you'll have a second demand shock. So if you work this out, even for this first order, second order, third order effect,
you're looking at the gross destruction of economic value created, right? So anybody who has studied any kind of economics can calculate the economic value created or surplus when plotting the supply and demand curves. You're going to see a steady erosion of that through the lockdown. A bulk of that will be eroded by the time we are done.
So if that is the case, surely by now we should have been looking, because the constraint we have in India and more so in Tamil Nadu, our finances are a mess. The bank's finances are a mess. The government's finances are a mess. And we are in a situation where the global appetite for risk has taken a sudden plunge. Till recently, there was all this money floating around. Everybody was buying anything in sight. Now, after the OECD banks, particularly the US Federal Reserve, has come out and in an unprecedented way, more so than in the global financial crisis, because they understand this is a bigger problem than that, have pumped in trillions of dollars of liquidity into the system, and still they are worried that they have not done enough. Now I'm saying we are going to find that market prices, which have crashed faster now than they did in the Great Depression, though they've come back a bit, but I don't think it's a long-term rally. I think it's a sucker punch kind of rally. You will find that in this risk situation, with all of the liquidity out there, still nobody wants to buy risky assets. So if you say, I'm going to suddenly kind of print and spend and start deflating the currency and printing kind of unlimited amounts of money, you can't do that either. So we are in a situation where, because we have such strong balance sheet and financial constraints and such high economic risk, time is of the essence. With every passing day that you do not act, you are actually compounding the extent of the risk, the extent of the misery, the depth of the humanitarian problem. So any government, certainly state government, central government, should have been well into the financial planning of disaster recovery by now. I am not comfortable that our government is doing that. The reason I'm not comfortable is that they have still not talked a lot about it. They say 1,000 rupees per household. I don't see how that helps. Only those with ration cards. Many people of the poorest, particularly migrant, don't have ration cards. They say they were going to give product for free last announcement, but there's not enough product in the ration supplies. And in my constituency, I'm getting complaints that there's not even enough sugar to give away, let alone that they're going to give it for free or not for free. So here is a government that needs all the help it can get. And it ought to be taking help from anybody. Instead, what do? They say, you remember the order from 4 or 5 days ago. No private entity can do any good like feeding people or supplying and all that. You have to give it to the government and the government will deal. Now that to me is the perversity of image management, right? Because you know and I know, in a state of 7.5 crore people, the entire government workforce is about 15 lakh employees, right? Hardly a few percent of the population. If I have to go, even assuming 100% of the government, from the chief minister to the lowest office boy, are at work, how can I coordinate the goodwill that everybody in the society who wants, let's say that the top third of society want to do something for the remaining 2/3. So now you're looking at 2.5 crore people who want help, right? I am on my street, I see 2-3 families weaker than mine, I want to provide food to them. If I have to go to the government for this, how is it tenable, right? So it was a perversity of an order. When the DMK challenged it both politically and legally, the government came back with an interpretation that was only slightly less perverse. It said you have to work together with the district administration. In the district of Madurai, there are 10 constituencies which with 2.5 million voters, the odds of you getting the district collector's office to work with everybody who wants to help is exactly zero. And then if you create a situation where there's 100 people who want to help and only 3 people in the collector office will work with you, what happens then? Then you start having selective politics, right? So they say all those who are ruling party or ruling party affiliates, you come, I'll give you permission to work with me. What happened in Chennai Corporation with the RSS kind of going. And all those who are opposition MLA, sorry, you don't get. The first 6 days I was supplying poor people in my constituency, I supplied without any approval from the government. I asked for approval for these activities for these individuals. They neither said no, nor they said yes. What am I going to do? I'm not going to stop helping. So I helped without the paper. So I'm glad the High Court finally came out and said this is a kind of perversity. You can follow, the government can set the rules, and all those who want to help can follow the rules of physical distancing, not congestion, no more than X people, no more than so many, at one place, all this stuff. But things like saying don't help people or don't help others is like, what they used to say, dog in the manger in the old analogy. Neither you do, nor you allow other people to do, and you will let the problem fester. So in conclusion, I think what I'd like to say is this government has kind of completely, in my opinion, underestimated the complexity, the severity, and the long-term consequences of this whole episode, this pandemic. It is even now not too late for them to say it is the biggest problem we have faced in our lives. It is not only a medical problem, it is an economic problem, it is a humanitarian problem, it is every kind of nightmare that anybody who is in office should have. And therefore, let us all work together, who all can contribute in what all ways. Please come forward. Here are the guidelines, here are the constraints, here are the kind of limits to what you should do without increasing risk to the system. But from feeding 2 families to supplying to others to protecting to whatever, everybody come in. And at the top level, yes, let us get the benefit of leaders like our party president, K Stalin, who have been in this seat before during 2009, during the H1N1 crisis, and whose views are certainly worth hearing. I mean, an intelligent person assumes 2 things. 1, no human being is perfect. We all have strengths and weaknesses. 2, Surely it is better for me to take input from 10 than 1, from 50 than 10, from 100 than 50. Of course, there's some law of diminishing returns and the time required. But for somebody to say, I don't need input from anybody, I am self-contained and can take on this problem, and the facts, bear out the reality that there's no such thing. So I hope it's not too late. I hope the government kind of corrects its attitude first and tries from the lowest granular level, as the Madras High Court order has told them to do, all the way to the party leaders of the opposition parties or whoever's not in the government. Bring them all together and get their collective input, because our problems are only starting. Let's be very clear. Just because we are only 10 days or 12 days away from the stop of lockdown doesn't mean that the bulk of the problems of the crisis are behind us. In my opinion, we are facing another 2 to 3 months at least of uncertainty, because we have not done enough tests. On what basis will we tell people, feel safe, you can go wherever you want, do whatever you want? So we're facing at least 2 to 3 months of uncertainty of, life choices, travel, congregation, etc. And we are facing at least 9 to 10 months of the worst economic kind of scenario that we have seen in our lifetimes. This is early days. It's still not too late. It can be corrected. It can be improved. Nobody is perfect. We are all, little skill in little places. The more we come together, the greater the collective good. I wish this government takes that into consideration and gets on board a lot more people and starts to be more transparent. This is not the time to worry about the political consequences. In my opinion, the political consequences of this are already baked in. Good or bad, I don't think they can be changed now. Either you have done a fantastic job, in which case you should get the credit, or you didn't do it, in which case you're going to pay the price. Now is not the time to worry about consequences 6 months, 8 months, 10 months from now at the next election. Now is the time to fix the problem. In fact, I'll go one step further. Just like I said when I came to election, when I was running, I said, I'm come here to follow my father's and my grandfather's good work. And therefore, I will not pay for votes, even though people say that you can't win without paying for votes. I said, I'll not pay for votes. Not because I said I was sure I would win, but I said, I don't need to win that badly. If there are people who are willing to vote for me without me having to pay for votes, that's great. Then I can do the kind of service I wanted to do, like my father, like my grandfather. And if it's not, no problem. That means I'm not fit for the system. And I'm happy to go do other things with my life. I don't want to do this. I say the same thing now. If it turns out that this government is fantastically great and can alleviate people's lives and problems, all the misery, all the consequences of this, hey, there are other things I can do with my life. At the very least, I can retire and live well. I have enough, resources for that. So I have no interest in doing politics for politics' sake. Unless there's room for improvement, there's no need for anybody else's input. But we all know what the history is. There's huge room for improvement. So the government should focus on that first.
Thank you. Uh, just before wrapping up, sir, I would like you to tell us in 2 minutes, highlighting some of the incredible works that DMK, the party, is doing at the ground level. And that's before we close. I think it's important that this message.
Yeah, no, listen, I think I've never been prouder of being a member of the DMK than I am in the last 2 weeks. Without exception, every single office bearer that I know, every MLA, every MP, every district secretary, every ward secretary in my constituency, every single person has stepped up to the plate. Some of us have slightly better resources and slightly better access, so we try to do at that level. But without exception, from feeding people to supplying personal protective equipment to supplying food supplies that can be cooked at their own houses, to supporting doctors, policemen, farmers, get the product out. It's incredible, the range of activities, right? Just not to make a big deal of this, but one issue came to my attention that an orphanage that also looks after stray cats was short of cat food and not getting a permit to get cat food, and cats were dying. 3 of the 21 cats had died. In 2 or 3 hours through the DMK network, I was able to fix that and make sure that supplies were delivered. And then over the next 36 hours, make sure it is taken care of for 8 or 10 days. I mean, for till the lockdown is over at least, right? So we see all kinds of problems, right? And in that way, I would say that it has also been a deeply kind of validating experience for me. I gave up a corporate career to come here, and I wondered whether I would fit in, whether I would make a difference, and whether I could add value and all that. I would say that more so than any other period, this kind of lockdown period has given all of us the chance to really understand the complexity of everyday lives for a lot of our constituents and to add values in existential ways. I mean, there's no greater, in the Hindu culture, as you know, there's no greater kind of virtue than feeding somebody when they are short of food, when they have hunger. So in that sense, normally we give money to temple festivals or to public events, and we have Annadanan.
And those are the more regular events, right? But here in my constituency, and I'm sure every MLA has done the same, I'm sure we're going to do this in an organized way for the DMK in the next few days.
Thousands of families we have supplied food. Migrant workers left stuck. Some Rajasthan MLA I've never heard of in my life, heard from before. I didn't even know what party he was. Sent me a WhatsApp message, said 18 of my constituents are stuck in your constituency who had come on a pilgrimage. Can you please take care of them? They are stuck with no rent and no food. And so I said, listen, I don't know how long the lockdown lasts. Till the lockdown lasts, they are my responsibility. I'll make sure they're taken care of and given medical attention and place to stay and food to eat. And so, we're helping. So I think it is very clear. I worried, to be very honest, when I came as a professional, I worried about the organizational design and strength of the DMK in some ways. The technology infrastructure was weak. The communication infrastructure was weak. But the sense of camaraderie, the sense of a common philosophy of the Dravidian ethos of the values was always strong. And in this kind of situation, especially where the established networks are broken and where the kind of large gatherings are not permitted, and so it's more about output rather than image. For example, I have not gone and made one photo opportunity because I wanted to set the example that lockdown means lockdown. And yet, I have been able to supply thousands of families provisions. The reason I've been able to do that because the DMK has that infrastructure. Now, I would say in my constituency, I went out of my way to create a stronger infrastructure than when I came. But I can now make sure that every booth I have 3 to 5 volunteers, meaning every booth is about 1,000 voters, about 300 households. For every 300 households, I have 3 or 5 volunteers, so that any call comes in that says, I'm stuck, I need medicine, I need food, I need help, I need to get to the hospital. I don't have to send somebody from some central dispatch to that. I have somebody at every location who can help because, the booths are all physically contiguous areas. So I think the DMK kind of has shown what one can do with a highly organized party, irrespective of whether one is in power or not. And so I have to say, both of my leader, who was visionary, who told us which segments to focus on the weakest, on the daily wage, on the migrant. I'm saying when the assembly was in session on March 12th, on March 15th, on March 17th, his statements in the assembly reflect that, down to kind of what we have done, each of us at a granular level, and what.
For example, my ward secretaries have been doing a lot of good things. In my constituency, there are 22 corporation wards. However hard I try, I can't do what the 22 ward secretaries can do. They are able to ensure the supply of things like vegetables, fruits, milk, which are perishable. So unless we work hand in hand, we can't keep the people fully covered. So it has been very eye-opening and kind of a ray of light in the darkness for me in the midst of this crisis to see how well our party is functioning.
In fact, I recall this very powerful message by தலைவர் செயல்படவில்லை என்றால் செயல்பட வைப்போம், which actually summarizes the party's dedication. To conclude, in fact, I recall your observation that what we need are chisels and not sledgehammers. With that thought, sir, I would like you to give some concluding remarks so that we can close this conversation?
Yeah, I think the disaster is a unprecedented one. We are facing a bigger problem than we've ever seen in our lifetimes. Whatever we think the long-term consequences are, is going to be worse than that. So it's timely, thoughtful, and collective action that is needed now. Now is not the time to worry about image building or one-upmanship or leveraging of platforms. One party who happens to be in government and the other not. I think the government needs to learn from its mistakes. I point out the mistakes not to be vindictive or not to score points, but to say, you are not in a position to say you are all-knowing, all-seeing, perfect. Therefore, you don't need help from others. You need a lot of help. It is a bigger problem than anybody. If we were in power, we would have needed help and we would have taken it. If Talavar Kalaignar, they always called all parties whenever there was a problem. So in that perspective, I would say the time is now. Every day matters. Get a collective kind of input together. Take up the offer of our leader. Work hand in hand. Let us put aside political differences. The people need all our talents, all our help, all our insight, all our infrastructure, and the time for politics will come later.
Thank you very much, sir. I wish you all the very best in your service to the people of Tamil Nadu. And thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.